They say Hollywood is all smiles and champagne, red carpets, charming interviews, and behind-the-scenes friendships that last a lifetime. But what if I told you that sometimes behind the glamour, behind the camera flashes and perfectly rehearsed talk show appearances, there's real hatred, not petty jealousy, not rivalry for a role. I'm talking about full-blown, deep-seated hatred. Now, Pierce Brosnan. You know him, the smoldering eyes, the effortless charm, the Irish accent that could melt steel. He's played suave spies, grieving fathers, charming crooks, and romantic leads. He was James Bond for an entire generation. On screen, he's always been calm, collected, and classy. But even the classiest men have their breaking points. Over the years, there have been whispers, rumors, stories from the set, and while Brosnan has mostly kept things professional in public, there came a time during a private off-the-record conversation that eventually leaked, and then in bits and pieces over the years where he named the 5 actors he absolutely could not stand. People he worked with, people who pushed his patience to the absolute limit, and some of them you'll recognize right away. Some might leave you speechless. Let's start with the name that shocked everyone when it first surfaced. Pierce Brosnan hated working with Terry Hatcher. Yes, the Lois Lane actress, the 90s icon, the desperate housewife. They worked together on the 1997 Bond film Tomorrow Never Dies, and from the outside, everything looked fine. They had chemistry. The posters looked amazing, but behind the scenes, it was chaos. According to crew members, Brosnan was furious because Terry kept him waiting for hours, day after day. She reportedly arrived late on multiple occasions, forcing the crew to halt production. Pierce, being the professional he is, tried to stay quiet. But one day, he snapped. He confronted her right there, on set. No filters, no pleasantries. Then the truth came out. Hatcher had been pregnant during filming, something she hadn't publicly revealed yet. She wasn't being difficult. She was just sick, tired, exhausted. By the time Brosnan found out, it was too late. The tension was already thick. The damage, done. Years later, he admitted they didn't get along at all. His words were cold. I got very upset with her. It wasn't the only time his temper flared. Now, let's talk about Val Kilmer. Now here's where it gets messy, because Brosnan and Kilmer never shared a screen. But there's a reason Kilmer still makes Brosnan's most hated list. It goes back to the 2000s, when Brosnan was attached to a Western project. He was considering producing it. Val Kilmer's name came up. He wanted the lead. Brosnan reportedly refused. Why? Because of Kilmer's reputation. By then, Kilmer had already made waves in Hollywood for being difficult, even hostile on set. He'd clashed with directors, walked off films, and was rumored to be impossible to work with. Brosnan, who values professionalism above all, wanted nothing to do with it. According to sources close to the project, Brosnan said flat out, "I will not work with him. I won't even be in the same building." That Western, it fell apart, but the grudge remained. Now let's move on to a name that might just break your heart. Robin Williams. Yes, that Robin Williams. Now, let's be clear, Pierce never said he hated Robin personally, but their time together on Mrs. Doubtfire was more complicated than fans ever realized on that movie. Brosnan played the other man, the clean-cut romantic interest to Sally Field's character. Robin Williams, of course, played the desperate dad in disguise. On screen it was magical, off-screen it was unpredictable. Robin was famous for going off-script, improvising, shifting the tone of a scene without warning. Brosnan, a classically trained actor, was used to precision, timing, control, and Robin had none of that. In one interview, Brosnan confessed, "You never knew what he'd say next. He'd change a line mid-scene and I'd just have to roll with it." At first it was exciting, but as filming went on, it wore thin. Some days, Pierce would leave the set exhausted, frustrated, feeling like he wasn't acting, he was just reacting to Robin's chaos. He never trashed Robin publicly. In fact, after Robin's death, Pierce called him a genius. But behind the curtain, their creative differences drove a wedge between them. Which brings us to someone Pierce Brosnan openly despises to this day. Liam Neeson. Now this one shocked a lot of fans, especially since both actors are Irish, both tall, charming, elegant, and successful in their own right. But here's where things get tense. In the late 90s, there was a behind-the-scenes battle for the James Bond role. When Brosnan's time as Bond was coming to an end, producers considered bringing in a new face. Neeson's name came up. And according to multiple sources, Liam was campaigning hard, quietly, behind the scenes. Meetings, phone calls, trying to nudge Brosnan out and take the reins. Pierce found out, and he did not take it well. In a rare moment of unfiltered anger, Brosnan reportedly called Neeson a snake in the grass. The two were invited to the same charity gala months later, and Brosnan refused to attend. To this day, they've never appeared in a film together, never done a joint interview, and if you pay attention, whenever Neeson's name comes up, Brosnan changes the subject. Now, the last name on this list might be the most unexpected. Daniel Craig. Yes, the man who replaced Brosnan as Bond. Now let's be clear, Brosnan has publicly praised Daniel's performance many times. He's called him a great Bond and a great actor, but behind the diplomatic words, there's real pain. Here's why. When Brosnan was let go from the Bond franchise after Die Another Day, he found out through the press, no call, no thank you, just done. It hurt. He'd given nearly a decade of his life to the role. He'd revived the franchise, and suddenly it was over. Daniel Craig came in and took over with Casino Royale, a gritty reboot that redefined Bond completely. Gone were the quips and charm. In came the brooding intensity. Fans loved it, and that's what hurt the most. Brosnan never hated Daniel Craig the man, but he couldn't hide the bitterness over how it all ended. In one unguarded moment, he said, "It broke my heart to be told I was done. No warning, just goodbye." When asked about Daniel Craig years later, Brosnan's smile didn't quite reach his eyes. So, there you have it. 5 actors Pierce Brosnan either hated working with or never forgave. Some tested his patience, others tested his loyalty, and a few simply reminded him how cutthroat Hollywood really is. Because behind the charm, the tuxedos, and the perfectly tailored suits, actors are still human. They clash, they compete, they resent, and sometimes they walk away from a scene not just with a paycheck but with a grudge that lasts a lifetime. Pierce Brosnan may look like the perfect gentleman on screen, but like any leading man, he's got his shadows. And now, you know their names. Because when you bring together huge egos, tight shooting schedules, clashing personalities, and multi-million-dollar stakes, not everyone walks away as friends. And sometimes, they walk away with something else entirely. Pure hatred. Pierce Brosnan, the man who brought style and sophistication to James Bond in the 90s and early 2000s, is known to the public as a gentleman.com/collected. Graceful, he rarely speaks ill of anyone, and in a business where backstabbing is just another day at the office, that alone made him a rare breed. But every gentleman has his limits, and over the years, bits and pieces of behind-the-scenes conversations began to leak. Quiet comments in interviews, off-the-record chatter with journalists, whispers on set, and eventually, a pattern started to emerge. There were 5 actors that Pierce Brosnan reportedly hated working with. Some of these names are beloved icons, some were almost rivals, and others, their encounters with Brosnan were so toxic, you'd never guess it from the way they smiled on camera. But let's peel back the curtain, because once you hear the full stories, you'll understand why Pierce Brosnan never forgot these 5 names. Let's start where it all started to unravel. Terry Hatcher. When Brosnan landed his second Bond film, Tomorrow Never Dies, expectations were sky high. Bond was back. Bigger, faster, slicker. The producers cast Terry Hatcher as Paris Carver, the seductive former flame of 007. The casting looked perfect. She had the looks, the charm, the charisma. But what happened next nearly derailed the entire shoot. Terry repeatedly showed up late, sometimes by hours. On a Bond set where every minute is thousands of dollars burned, that's no small thing. Brosnan, ever the professional, kept it quiet at first, but eventually his patience cracked. One day, after waiting on set for nearly 3 hours, he reportedly confronted her directly. He asked her, "Why are you wasting everyone's time?" It was harsh, public, and humiliating. But what Brosnan didn't know was that Terry was pregnant. Early stages, she was sick, exhausted, and trying to power through without telling anyone. By the time he found out, the damage was done. Brosnan later called their experience together frosty. Hatcher, when asked, simply smiled and said, "He was just upset I kept him waiting." To this day, they've never reunited professionally. But the next name on Brosnan's list, he didn't even have to work with him directly to feel the hate. Val Kilmer. The 2 actors never shared a single scene, and yet, Kilmer's name comes up every single time Brosnan talks about people he refuses to work with. It traces back to the early 2000s. Brosnan was attached to a gritty, Western drama, a passion project, something he wanted to co-produce, star in, and use to redefine his post-Bond career. Val Kilmer lobbied hard for a supporting role, but Brosnan shut it down immediately. Why? Because Kilmer's reputation was toxic. Directors called him a nightmare. Co-stars walked off sets. In one infamous shoot, he got into a physical altercation with a cameraman. He was brilliant on screen but uncontrollable off it. Brosnan, who valued harmony on set, wasn't willing to risk it. He told producers, "If you hire him, I will." Kilmer didn't get the part. That film never got made, but the animosity, it lingered. And then, there was Robin Williams. Now this one isn't hate in the traditional sense. Brosnan respected Robin deeply. After his death, he gave beautiful tributes, but make no mistake, they did not get along creatively. On the set of Mrs. Doubtfire, Brosnan played Stu Miranda's handsome new boyfriend. The character was clean, refined, reliable, basically the opposite of Robin's wild, unpredictable Daniel Hillard. But behind the scenes, the chaos was very, very real. Robin would go completely off. In the middle of emotional scenes, he'd improvise lines, switch up dialogue, do voices, sometimes even break into characters that weren't even in the movie. And Brosnan, he hated it. In one scene at the pool, Robin kept throwing in improvised insults while Brosnan's character was trying to swim. The takes kept getting ruined. Brosnan, trying to keep his cool, finally told the director, Tell him to pick a version and stick to it. The director didn't because Robin was the star, so Brosnan swallowed it. But that frustration never quite left. Years later, when asked about Robin's genius, Brosnan gave a subtle reply. He was brilliant. Exhausting, but brilliant. Translation: it was a war between chaos and control. Robin always won. Now, let's talk about the rivalry that never made headlines, but almost turned ugly behind closed doors. Liam Neeson, both Irish, both serious actors, and for a while, both in the running to be James Bond. Here's what went down. When Brosnan was still under contract for one more Bond film, whispers started swirling in Hollywood that producers were eyeing a new direction. Someone grittier, older, more rugged. Liam Neeson's name shot up the list. Now here's the twist. Instead of turning it down or playing it cool, Neeson allegedly took meetings, started feeling out the producers. His team even floated the idea publicly just enough to create buzz. And Brosnan, he found out. He was furious. In private, he called Neeson a backdoor opportunist. He believed Neeson was trying to push him out before his time was done. There was no direct confrontation, no punch thrown, but their relationship was severed instantly. Neeson never became Bond, but Brosnan never forgave the ambition behind it. And now, the fifth name, the one that's the most complicated, the one Pierce Brosnan never wanted to talk about, but the one he can't quite hide from. Daniel Craig. The man who replaced him when Brosnan was quietly dropped after Die Another Day. It wasn't done with grace. There was no farewell, no phone call, no ceremony. He found out through his agent. And just like that, his run as Bond, his legacy was over. Daniel Craig was brought in as the new Bond for a new era. Darker, tougher, brutal, gone with the gadgets and the charm. In came the broken bones and blood. Audiences loved it. And Brosnan, he was devastated. He didn't hate Craig the person, but he resented what Craig represented. The replacement, the upgrade, the erasure of everything Brosnan had brought to the role. In a rare interview, he said, "I felt I had more to give, but they had other plans. I wasn't even told to my face." That pain, it never quite went away. Years later, at a red carpet event, when asked if he'd seen No Time to Die, Brosnan shrugged and said, "Haven't gotten around to it." That wasn't just a schedule issue, that was a wound that hasn't fully healed. So, what does this tell us? It tells us that even in the most polished corners of Hollywood, even with the most composed actors in the world, there are real emotions, real conflict, real grudges. Pierce Brosnan isn't just Bond, he's a man, a fiercely dedicated actor, a consummate professional, and like anyone in a brutal, competitive business, he's had to deal with betrayal, disrespect, and disappointment. These 5 names, they're not just co-stars or fellow actors. They're chapters in Brosnan's story, where things went wrong. Some of them hurt his pride, some hurt his process, and some broke his heart. But through it all, he stayed silent, composed, until the whispers finally surfaced, until people began to piece together the truth behind that elegant smile. Because even legends have enemies. And now, you know who his were.